Imagine a world where wealth and power can buy almost anything except the one thing that truly matters: love. In the heart of a glittering city, Alexander Kane, a billionaire CEO with a shattered past, makes a bold and shocking offer: $10 million for one night with a woman who can help him secure his legacy. But what begins as a cold, calculated transaction takes an unexpected turn when he meets Elena Torres, a fearless journalist with a fiery spirit and a painful story of her own. This is not just a story about money or ambition. It's about two broken souls finding each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. As they navigate betrayal, loss, and the weight of their pasts, they discover something far more valuable than wealth: the courage to love again. If you're a fan of heart-stirring romance, powerful transformations, and stories that remind us of the beauty of second chances, this is a journey you won't want to miss. Get ready to be swept away by a tale of love, redemption, and the legacy that only true connection can create. The city below sparkled like a sea of stars, its lights stretching endlessly into the horizon. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of his sprawling hilltop mansion, Alexander Kane stood motionless, his sharp silhouette framed against the night. The world outside was alive, bustling with energy, but within these walls silence reigned. It was a silence he had grown accustomed to, a silence that mirrored the void in his heart. Alexander was a man who had everything, or so it seemed. As the CEO of Kane Enterprises, a global leader in technology and real estate, he had built an empire from the ground up. His name was synonymous with power, wealth, and innovation. Yet, behind the polished exterior and the headlines that celebrated his success, there was a man haunted by his past. Years ago, Alexander had suffered a loss so profound that it had reshaped his entire existence. His daughter Lily had been the light of his life, a beacon of innocence and joy in a world that often felt cold and calculated. But a tragic accident had taken her away, leaving him with nothing but memories and an unbearable weight of guilt. To make matters worse, his wife at the time, unable to cope with the grief, had betrayed him in the most devastating way, walking away when he needed her the most. Since then, Alexander had buried himself in his work, building walls so high that no one could climb them. But tonight, something was different. As he gazed out at the city, his mind churned with an idea, one that was as audacious as it was unconventional. He turned away from the window and walked to his desk, where a single piece of paper lay waiting. On it was a proposal, one that he had spent weeks contemplating. Alexander Kane, the man who could buy anything, had decided to make an offer that no one could ignore: $10 million for one night. But this wasn't about romance or companionship. No, Alexander had no interest in fleeting pleasures or superficial connections. This was about something far more significant: finding someone who could help him create a legacy, someone who could understand the weight of his ambitions and the depth of his pain. He picked up the paper and read it again, his expression unreadable. The terms were simple. He would pay $10 million to a woman who met his exacting criteria. She had to be intelligent, confident, and unshakable. A woman who could challenge him, intrigue him, and perhaps in some way heal him. The night would take place at his mansion, a fortress of luxury and solitude, where they would discuss the future, not just his, but theirs. Alexander knew how it sounded. To the outside world, it would seem like the whim of a bored billionaire, a man so detached from reality that he thought he could buy anything, even a connection. But to him it was a calculated risk, a way to find someone who could see beyond the money and the power to the man he truly was. He pressed a button on his desk, and moments later his assistant, Marcus, entered the room. Marcus was one of the few people Alexander trusted, a man who had been by his side through every triumph and every tragedy. "Is everything ready?" Alexander asked, his voice low but commanding. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "The invitations have been sent. We've narrowed it down to a select group of candidates, all of whom meet your specifications. The responses have been enthusiastic." Alexander nodded, his gaze returning to the cityscape. Good. Make sure the arrangements are flawless. I don't want any distractions. Marcus hesitated for a moment before speaking. If I may, sir, are you sure about this? It's a bold move, even for you. Alexander's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Bold moves are what built this empire, Marcus. And besides, what's the point of having everything if you can't take risks? Marcus nodded and left the room, leaving Alexander alone once more. He sat down at his desk, his fingers tracing the edge of the paper. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was close. As the night deepened, Alexander allowed himself to imagine what might come next. He didn't believe in fate, but he did believe in opportunity, and this, he thought, was the opportunity of a lifetime, not just for the woman who would accept his offer, but for him as well. Because deep down, beneath the layers of grief and ambition, Alexander Kane was a man searching for something he couldn't buy: redemption. The cafe was bustling with life, the hum of conversations blending with the clinking of coffee cups and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. Elena Torres sat at a corner table, her laptop open in front of her, fingers flying across the keyboard. She was in her element, piecing together the final details of an exposé that would shake the financial world to its core. Elena was no stranger to controversy. As one of the most respected investigative journalists in the country, she had built her career on uncovering the truths that others wanted to keep hidden. Her work had exposed corruption in high places, brought down CEOs, and even led to the imprisonment of a senator. But her success had come at a cost. Years ago, Elena's younger brother Miguel had been caught in the crossfire of a corporate scandal. He had worked for a company that was secretly embezzling funds, and when the truth came to light, Miguel had been made the scapegoat. The stress and public humiliation had driven him to take his own life, leaving Elena devastated and determined to fight for justice. Since then, her work had become her mission, her way of honoring Miguel's memory. But even someone as driven as Elena needed a break. She leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms and letting out a sigh. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she glanced at the screen. It was an email from an unknown sender, marked urgent. Curious, she opened it. The message was brief but intriguing. Elena Torres, you've been selected for an exclusive opportunity, a private meeting with Alexander Kane, CEO of Kane Enterprises. Compensation, $10 million for one night. Details to follow if you accept. Elena frowned, her journalist instincts immediately kicking in. Alexander Kane was a name she knew well. He was one of the most powerful men in the world, a billionaire whose empire spanned continents. But he was also notoriously private, rarely granting interviews or making public appearances. Why would someone like him want to meet her? And why such an outrageous offer? Her first instinct was to delete the email. It reeked of a scam or worse, a trap. But something stopped her. The name Alexander Kane carried weight, and the offer was too specific to be random. Against her better judgment, she replied with a single word: interested. 2 days later, Elena found herself standing in front of a sleek black car parked outside her apartment. The driver, a man in a crisp suit, opened the door for her without a word. She hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, her heart pounding with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The car wound its way through the city, eventually climbing into the hills, where the skyline gave way to sprawling estates. When they arrived at the gates of Alexander Kane's mansion, Elena couldn't help but be impressed. The property was a fortress of modern design, all glass and steel, perched on the edge of a cliff with a view that seemed to stretch into infinity. The driver escorted her to the front door, where a butler greeted her and led her inside. The interior was as grand as she had imagined. Marble floors, towering ceilings, and walls adorned with abstract art. But there was no time to admire the decor. She was ushered into a study where Alexander Kane was waiting. He rose from his chair as she entered, his presence commanding yet understated. He was taller than she had expected, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her. "Elena Torres," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "Thank you for coming." Elena crossed her arms, her journalist instincts kicking in. "I'm not sure why I'm here, Mr. Kane. Your email was vague." Alexander gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. He smiled faintly, as if amused by her defiance. "I appreciate your directness. Let me be equally direct. I've been following your work for some time. You're intelligent, resourceful, and unafraid to challenge authority. Those are qualities I admire." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Flattery won't get you anywhere. What do you want from me?" Alexander's expression grew serious. "I want to make you an offer. $10 million for one night. But this isn't about romance or companionship. It's about legacy." Lena's eyes narrowed. "Legacy?" He nodded. "I've built an empire, but I've also made enemies. I need someone who can help me secure my future. Someone who can see beyond the money and power to the man I truly am." "I believe you're that person." Elena stared at him, trying to gauge his sincerity. The offer was absurd, but there was something about Alexander that intrigued her. He wasn't like the corrupt executives she had exposed in the past. There was a vulnerability in his eyes, a hint of pain that he was trying to hide. "And if I say no?" she asked. Alexander shrugged. "Then you walk away with nothing, and I find someone else. But I think you'll say yes. You're too curious not to." Elena hated to admit it, but he was right. She was curious about him, about his motives, about what he wasn't telling her. Against her better judgment, she nodded. "Fine," she said. "I'll hear you out. But don't think for a second that I'm doing this for the money." Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that softened his features. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The night air was heavy with tension as Alexander Kane and Elena Torres sat across from each other in the grand dining room of his mansion. The table between them was long and imposing, but it felt like a battlefield rather than a place for conversation. The flickering candlelight cast shadows on their faces, highlighting the sharpness of their words and the unspoken truths lingering in the air. Elena leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "So let me get this straight," she said, her voice laced with skepticism. "You're offering me $10 million to spend one night here, not for romance, not for companionship, but to, what, help you figure out your legacy? You do realize how insane that sounds, right?" Alexander's gaze didn't waver. "I'm aware of how it sounds, but I'm not looking for someone to understand the surface of my life. I need someone who can see beyond the headlines, beyond the wealth, and help me secure something that will outlast me." Elena raised an eyebrow. "And you think I'm that person? Why, because I'm good at digging up dirt on people like you?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of Alexander's lips. "Precisely. You're not afraid to challenge authority. You see the cracks in the foundation that others overlook." "That's exactly what I need." Elena shook her head, letting out a dry laugh. "You're unbelievable. Do you even hear yourself? You're asking me to help you build a legacy, but you don't even know what that means. Legacy isn't something you can buy, Alexander. It's something you earn." Her words hit him harder than he expected. For a moment, he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "You're right. Legacy isn't something you can buy, but it is something you can build with the right people by your side." Elena opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the hall. Marcus, Alexander's trusted assistant, appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice tight with urgency, "we have a problem." Alexander's expression hardened. "What kind of problem?" Marcus hesitated, glancing at Elena before continuing. "It's the board. They've called an emergency meeting. There's been a leak. Details about the company's upcoming merger have been made public. The stock is already plummeting. Alexander's jaw tightened, and for the first time that evening, Elena saw a crack in his composed exterior. "Who's behind it?" he demanded. "We're still investigating," Marcus replied, "but it looks like someone on the inside, possibly one of the board members." Alexander stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Cancel the meeting. I'll handle this myself." Elena watched the exchange with growing curiosity. She had seen powerful men crumble under pressure, but Alexander wasn't like them. There was a fire in his eyes, a determination that intrigued her. Against her better judgment, she spoke up. "Wait," she said, standing as well. "If you're dealing with a leak, you'll need more than brute force to fix it. You'll need someone who can think like a journalist, someone who knows how to follow the trail." Alexander turned to her, his expression unreadable. "And you're offering to help?" Elena shrugged. "Let's just say I'm curious. Besides, if I'm going to spend the night here, I might as well make myself useful." For a moment, Alexander said nothing, his piercing gaze locked on hers. Then he nodded. "Fine. But if you're going to help, you'll need to know what you're up against." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Alexander and Elena worked side by side in his private study, poring over documents, emails, and financial records. Elena's investigative instincts kicked in, and she quickly identified patterns that Alexander's team had overlooked. "It's not just one person," she said, her eyes scanning a series of emails. "This is coordinated. Someone on the board is working with an outside party, probably a competitor. They are trying to sabotage the merger." Alexander's expression darkened. "Do you have proof?" "Not yet," Elena admitted. "But I'm close. Give me a few more hours." As the night wore on, the tension between them began to shift. What had started as a transactional arrangement was becoming something more. Alexander found himself drawn to Elena's sharp mind and unyielding determination, while Elena couldn't help but admire Alexander's resilience and the depth of his pain. But just as they were beginning to make progress, the situation took a dangerous turn. A message appeared on Alexander's phone, a threat sent anonymously. "Call off the merger, or the world will know your darkest secret." Alexander's face went pale as he read the message. Elena noticed immediately. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "It's nothing." "Don't lie to me," Elena said, her voice firm. "If you want my help, you need to be honest with me. What's your darkest secret, Alexander?" For a moment, he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the phone. Then, with a heavy sigh, he looked at her. "It's about my daughter, the accident that killed her. It wasn't an accident. Someone caused it. And I've spent years trying to find out who." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. "Why didn't you go public with it?" "Because I didn't have proof," Alexander said, his voice heavy with regret. "And because the person responsible is someone powerful, someone who could destroy everything I've built." Elena stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't just about a merger or a leak. This was about justice for Alexander, for his daughter, and for the legacy he was trying to build. "Then we'll find the proof," she said, her voice steady. "Together." Alexander looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," he said quietly. But as they returned to their work, both of them knew that the night was far from over. The challenges ahead would test not only their skills, but also their trust in each other. And as the clock ticked toward dawn, one thing became clear. This was no longer just a transaction. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The first rays of dawn filtered through the massive windows of Alexander Kane's study, casting a soft golden glow over the room. Papers were strewn across the desk, laptops hummed quietly, and the faint aroma of coffee lingered in the air. Alexander and Elena sat side by side, their focus unwavering as they pieced together the final threads of the conspiracy threatening his empire. But something had shifted between them. The tension that had defined their earlier interactions was now replaced by a quiet understanding, a connection that neither of them had anticipated. Elena leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "I think we've got it," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion but also triumph. "The emails, the financial transfers, the anonymous threats, it all points to one person, Richard Calloway." Alexander's jaw tightened at the name. Calloway was one of his oldest business rivals, a man who had spent years trying to undermine him. "It makes sense," Alexander said, his voice low. "He's been trying to sabotage me for years. But to go this far?" Elena turned to him, her expression serious. "This isn't just about business, Alexander. Calloway isn't just trying to destroy your company. He's trying to destroy you. And if we don't act fast, he might succeed." Alexander nodded, his mind racing, but as he looked at Elena, he felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, he wasn't facing his battles alone. "Thank you," he said quietly. Elena raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For staying," he replied. "For helping me. You didn't have to, but you did. And I won't forget it." Elena hesitated, her usual sharpness softening. "I didn't do it for you," she said, though her tone lacked its usual edge. "I did it because it was the right thing to do, and because I know what it's like to lose someone you love." Her words hung in the air, heavy, with unspoken emotion. Alexander looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw the pain she carried, the same pain that had shaped him. "Elena," he began, his voice uncharacteristically gentle, "I don't know what you've been through, but I can see it's left its mark, just like it has on me. Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe that's why I chose you." Elena met his gaze, her eyes searching his. "You think this is fate?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't believe in fate," Alexander said, "but I do believe in second chances, and maybe this is ours." The hours that followed were a blur of action. Armed with the evidence Elena had uncovered, Alexander called an emergency meeting with his legal team and board of directors. Together, they devised a plan to expose Calloway's schemes and protect the company from further damage. Elena watched from the sidelines, impressed by Alexander's composure and leadership. He was a man who had been pushed to the brink, yet he refused to break. And as she observed him, she realized something she hadn't expected. She admired him. But admiration wasn't the only thing she felt. That evening, as the chaos began to settle, Alexander found Elena on the balcony, gazing out at the city below. The air was cool, and the lights of the city sparkled like 1,000 tiny stars. "You did it," Elena said as he approached. "You saved your company." Alexander joined her, his hands resting on the railing. "We did it," he corrected. "I couldn't have done it without you." Elena smiled faintly, but her expression was distant. "So, what now?" she asked. Alexander hesitated, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Now I rebuild. Not just the company, but everything. My life, my legacy, myself." He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "And I want you to be a part of it." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "Ah, Alexander, I know this started as a transaction," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But it's become so much more than that. You've shown me what it means to fight for something real, something worth holding on to, and I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." Elena looked at him, her heart pounding. She had spent years building walls around herself, just as he had, but in this moment, she felt those walls begin to crumble. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can let myself feel again." Alexander reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "You don't have to decide now," he said, "but just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment they stood in silence. the city lights reflecting in their eyes. And, as the night deepened, so did the connection between them, a connection that neither of them could deny. Weeks had passed since that fateful night, and life for both Alexander Kane and Elena Torres had changed in ways neither of them could have imagined. The scandal surrounding the attempted sabotage of Kane Enterprises had been exposed, and Richard Calloway was now facing legal action. The company's stock had stabilized, and Alexander's empire was stronger than ever. But for Alexander, the victory wasn't just about business. It was about the new chapter he was beginning, one that included Elena. Elena, too, had found herself in unfamiliar territory. For years she had lived a life of independence, driven by her mission to uncover the truth and hold the powerful accountable. But now she was part of something bigger. Working alongside Alexander, she had discovered a new purpose, not just in helping him rebuild his company, but in helping him rebuild himself. The boardroom of Kane Enterprises was buzzing with energy as Alexander and Elena entered together. The executives, who had once doubted Alexander's ability to lead in the face of adversity, now looked at him with renewed respect. And as for Elena, her presence at his side had become a symbol of the company's resilience and integrity. Alexander took his seat at the head of the table, his commanding presence silencing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and confident, "we've faced challenges that could have destroyed us, but we didn't just survive, we thrived, and now it's time to look to the future." He glanced at Elena, who gave him a small nod. "I've asked Elena Torres to join us today because she represents the values we need to embrace moving forward: honesty, courage, and a relentless pursuit of excellence. She's agreed to take on a new role as a consultant for Kane Enterprises, helping us ensure that we remain a company that stands for more than just profit." The room erupted in applause, and Elena felt a flush of pride. She had never imagined herself working for a corporation, let alone one as powerful as Kane Enterprises. But this wasn't just any corporation, and Alexander wasn't just any man. After the meeting, as the executives filed out, Alexander turned to Elena. "You didn't have to say yes," he said, his tone softer now. "Why did you?" Elena smiled. "Because I believe in what you're trying to do, and because I believe in you." Alexander's expression softened, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." Despite their growing connection, both Alexander and Elena knew that their journey was far from over. They were two people with scars that couldn't be healed overnight, but they were willing to try. One evening, as they sat together in Alexander's study, he opened up about the pain he had carried for so long. "After Lily died," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I didn't think I'd ever feel anything again. I shut myself off from the world because it was easier than facing the pain. But then you came along and you made me realize that maybe it's okay to feel again." Elena reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. "You don't have to do this alone, Alexander," she said. "You've spent so much of your life building walls, but maybe it's time to let someone in." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I'm trying," he said. "For the first time in a long time, I'm trying." Elena smiled, her own walls beginning to crumble. "Me too." As the months went by, Alexander and Elena worked together to transform Kane Enterprises into more than just a business empire. They launched initiatives to support underprivileged communities, funded scholarships for aspiring entrepreneurs, and invested in sustainable technologies. For Alexander, it was about more than just repairing his reputation. It was about creating a legacy that Lily would have been proud of. One afternoon, as they stood on the balcony of the Kane Enterprises headquarters, Alexander turned to Elena. "This is what I want my legacy to be," he said, gesturing to the city below. "Not just buildings and profits, but real change. Something that matters." Elena nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "And you're doing it," she said. "You're building something that will outlast you." Alexander smiled, but his expression grew serious. I couldn't have done it without you, he said. You've changed everything, Elena. You've changed me. Elena looked at him, her eyes shining. And you've shown me that it's okay to let someone in, that it's okay to trust again. For a moment they stood in silence, the city stretching out before them, and in that moment they both knew that they had found something rare and precious, something worth fighting for. On a quiet evening, months after their first meeting, Alexander and Elena found themselves back at his mansion, the place where it had all begun. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room as they sat together, their hands intertwined. I never thought I'd find this, Alexander said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not after everything I've been through. Elena smiled, her gaze steady. Neither did I. But sometimes life surprises you. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion that words couldn't capture. Elena, I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing. I want you to be a part of it, not just as my partner in business, but as my partner in life. Elena's breath caught, her heart pounding. Alexander, are you saying what I think you're saying? He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. I'm saying that I love you, and I don't want to spend another day without you. Tears filled Elena's eyes as she leaned closer, her voice trembling. I love you too. And as they kissed, the weight of their pasts melted away, leaving only the promise of a future filled with hope, love, and the legacy they would build together. If this story of love, redemption, and second chances touched your heart, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves inspiring romances as much as you do. And if you want to join us for more captivating stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you the stories that move and inspire. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.